Ustadah Khola Hasan. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, alhamdulillah.
Now, you're a very unique person from what I've heard so far. The reason I say that is because you're on the board of judges and scholars for the oldest established European Islamic Sharia Council. Could you tell us a little bit about the council, the work that they do, and what your role is with them?
The Islamic Sharia Council was set up about 35 years ago. It was set up to help Muslims living in a non-Muslim context to answer their questions, whether it's to do with prayer, to do with fasting, whatever issues there may be. So it's got a big fatwa department as well. And over the years they found that the majority of the work they were doing was dealing with family issues, to do with marriage breakdown, counselling, mediation, and above all giving women divorces, religious divorces, when they had been either abandoned by their husbands or the husbands were just refusing to give them a divorce and they were just keeping them chained up. And so the Sharia Council for over 30 years has granted I don't know how many thousands of women freedom and divorce to get away from abusive marriages.
Now, I believe you're one of the few females who holds such a high position within the Sharia Council like you do. How important do you think it is to have a female presence on such councils?
I think it's incredibly important. I think getting a female voice there, and it really helps the clients as well when they walk in and they feel that this is not just a male-dominated space. Now, I don't have a problem with men working in this field. In civil law, you will find mainly male judges as well. But it's just really important that that voice is there, and that, I've made subtle changes in the way we operate and the way we deal with clients, which I think, a female presence sort of helps. So incredibly important.
So I believe you've spent many years of your life studying law,
yes.
the law of the land,
yes.
and also Islamic law,
yes.
In traditional
yes.
methods and also in academia.
Yes.
Did you ever see yourself while you were doing this, engaged in this studying, that you would be helping people out in their family lives with the important issues which they have?
To be honest, no. It was a personal desire to understand law because it was something that I enjoyed studying. So I studied with my father traditional sciences simply because I wanted to get close to the Quran. I just thought it was a personal journey. And I studied at university because, again, I just enjoyed studying law, but I had no ambitions or plans to take that forward. And it was quite a surprise over the years where I was asked to just come in and maybe just answer a few questions for journalists, or, just to see what was happening. And I just slowly just started wandering in and out of the office some years ago, and slowly sort of my path was suddenly opened for me and I found myself working there.
So I believe you're somebody who's well trained in the law of the land, in British law. I believe you have a master's degree in international law.
Yes.
And you also hold this position as a scholar on the Islamic Sharia Council. I'm wondering, for people who don't understand the differences between Sharia law and British law, there's an accusation which is often thrown that Islamic law is not compatible with British law. Is that something you found in your experience?
Oh yes, I mean, people are absolutely terrified. The minute I'm in the media, whether I'm doing a radio interview or newspaper interview, whatever, immediately in my Twitter feed, I will get abuse. Go back to where you want to practice your own law. Sharia is not for this country. It's not for the modern age. Get out. Take your Sharia law with you. That's common, comments that we'll get on Twitter. And basically, I think the first thing that we really want people to know when we say the Islamic Sharia Council, we are not establishing Sharia law in Britain at all, especially criminal law. Criminal law can only be established by government. We do not punish adulterers or thieves, we don't do that. And we've had Britain First come into our office, and they seem to be searching for where we're burning people alive and chopping off hands in that room. They're sort of going around the office looking for signs of blood, and we swept it all up. It's been washed away. There's nothing for you to see. But we're not doing that. All we're doing is helping Muslims live their life in a way that they understand their faith. And that is to do with rituals, to do with prayer, to do with fasting, to do with charity, to do with pilgrimage. These are the kind of issues that we're dealing with. Also, we're helping women who are, and sometimes men who are in abusive marriages where they cannot get a religious divorce. If they can get a civil divorce, fine, but they want a religious divorce, because Muslims, when they get married, they have two ceremonies. And that's the same for the Sikhs, same for the Jews, Same for everybody else. All minority communities do this. They have two ceremonies, a civil ceremony and a religious ceremony. So when the marriage falls apart, they want help. And often they want counselling or advice from somebody who understands their culture, who knows the kind of background they're coming from, who knows the difficulties that maybe the extended family is putting on them. All these cultural restraints will not be understood outside that community. So we help them in that context, that we will give mediation, we will give counselling, and then at the end of the day, if we cannot save that marriage, then we help to dissolve the religious marriage only. And we ask them to go to the civil courts and to get the civil marriage ended there. So we are in no way competing with we're in no way competing with English civil law. We are not intruding on English civil law. We are not jumping on the toes of English civil law. In fact, we are helping civil law because we are taking away so many cases for mediation. English civil law cannot cope with the huge volume of cases that are coming for mediation. And all we're doing is actually helping, giving that mediation in a surrounding that couple find easy, where they know that the person talking to them understands their language, their religion, the cultural background.
So this is the key, isn't it? Understanding. You
Yes.
mentioned before that lots of women approach you. Would it be fair to say that the majority of clients you work with in the Islamic Sharia Council are women?
Yes, yes. 90% of our clients are women. Obviously, we will see their husbands.
Yeah.
Sometimes we will have to see the mother-in-law as well, because she's an issue in the marriage. So she has to come in. Sometimes we have to see the children as well. So we will see many members of the family, but our clients initially are generally women who are unhappy.
So is that 90% reflected across the country on the scholars and the people who sit on these, Sharia panels?
Yes. Sharia councils across the country will have the same sort of issues, and the fact that most of the clients will be women.
And in your experience, is that reflected on the membership, the board of scholars and the judges who reside over these panels?
The fact that there are no females...
For example, are they 90% of the panels of judges and scholars, are they 90% women?
Oh no.
No.
Sadly. No. Unfortunately, 99.9% of the scholars sitting on Sharia councils are men.
So what does you being there to receive women, how does that change the dynamics then?
It changes the dynamics in many ways. One is just the physical presence of a female sitting there. I often find that women will walk in and there'll be many people maybe in the reception and their eyes will be drawn towards the females because they feel that they can empathize with them, or that the female can empathize with them. And then also there's a theological issue as well, because I think sometimes there is a lack of compassion for women that comes from the minds and the voices of male scholars sometimes. I'm not having a go at male scholars. I think they're wonderful. But sometimes they miss things and they don't empathize and they don't understand that our theology has to change. If we don't understand the dynamics of the society in which we live, the changing role of women, women today in Britain are very different to women who were living in Medina in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They are much more, likely to be educated, to be working outside the home, to be in charge of their own finances, for example, to be literate financially, and to treat them as if they do not understand finances or that they don't have a career. If you've got a man complaining, well, my wife does not cook for me every day, can you, as a male scholar, tell her off? And the male scholar says to her, what's your problem, woman? Why don't you cook for your husband? Well, why has he not understood that if she has a full-time job and he has a full-time job, why can't they share the cooking responsibility? And unfortunately, this kind of language is not coming out of some of our male scholars. So I think that we need female scholars to go in there and to change the dynamics and to understand that society has changed and that Islamic theology has always been absolutely aware that it has to meet the needs of that community and that it cannot impose Mecca and Medina on people. It has to understand who they are, where they are and how they live.
So it's amazing that you are there, and this is something which you do. You encourage more women to be involved
Yes.
in this process. In terms of your work which you do with the media, I also understand you're quite involved with the likes of BBC Radio 4.
Yes.
How important do you think it is to speak to a demographic such as, you know, the average BBC Radio 4 listener? How important is it for people like that to hear your voice?
I think it's incredibly important because most people stereotype Muslims in a certain way, and we know that that stereotype is incredibly negative. You know, for some reason we are not able as a Muslim community across Europe to get out of the stereotypes that people have of us, and that have existed over 1,000 years. That stereotype is still there. For 1,000 years we've been beating at it and we're not getting anywhere. And the stereotypes of Muslim women are even worse. The repressed, the silent, the unable to speak, the downtrodden, those images are there. And so it's really important, I think, that for Muslims to speak out who are not just articulate in English, but who understand their faith and understand the society in which they live, they understand what Joe Bloggs is thinking when he's listening to them. That's really important.
And you also have a BBC Radio 4 accent, if I may say so.
Londoners.
Yeah. But I mean, people will automatically, they'll link, they'll connect themselves when they hear somebody like yourself speaking, and they probably won't expect the person behind the voice to be, you know, a Muslim woman.
I hope so. I hope that when they listen to me, they think, that is the voice of reason, that is the voice of decency, that is the voice of faith, and that is the voice of most Muslim people. Because the voices of the majority of Muslims has been hidden away, and the voice of the tyrants, the oppressors, the madmen has come out. And I just really hope that people like ourselves, who are vocal and who are out there speaking, are changing people's perceptions of, you see, it's a beautiful faith. Islam is such a beautiful faith. And when it hurts when I hear the way Islam is being abused, not just by non-Muslims, but by Muslims. And I feel that I need to do something.
One thing I said when I introduced you is I introduced you as somebody who's quite unique, and so it's really interesting to find that when you do get involved and engage with the media, you're saying that you're not on your own in this. There are many, many people up and down the country who share the same values, who share the same vision as yourself. How do you think that's a problem in society?
I think the problem is that the vast majority of Muslims think the way that I think and the way you think. Common sense, decency. Islam is a faith about spirituality, about God consciousness, about good character, about good morals. That's what Islam is about. Unfortunately, because of political issues and various other issues to do with, you know, whether it's satanic verses, whether it's to do with ISIS, whatever, whether it's to do with burning women alive for adultery, I don't know. All these issues have given people the impression that Islam is a religion of insanity, of violence, of, you know, and that's why people feel that Islam is not compatible with the Western world, because the Western world is so enlightened and so liberal and so democratic and so decent, and Muslims are not. So that image is there, and no matter what we seem to say, that image is there. So it's important that people like us are speaking, and the sad thing is that the vast majority of Muslims think like us, but unfortunately that voice is just not getting there.
But on the other side of this, I believe you're also involved in initiatives to raise awareness of the reasonable, the true side of Islam in our community. So you're involved in receiving visits from school children and involved in raising awareness there. What kind of activities are those, and what do you see as the benefits from that work?
Well, I've been with the East London Three Faiths Forum now for about 12 years, and that's Jewish, Christian, Muslim. And we meet every sort of 6 weeks, every 4 weeks. We have events. We've organised many trips to the Holy Lands, to Palestine, Israel, to look at the holy sites of all three faiths, and to bring the three faiths together, because faith is important to all of us. And in a secular world, it's important. So this is one thing that I do that I'm very proud of. I've learned so much about the different faiths, and I hope that we've taught others. And I also do a lot of school visits. The schools will ring me up and ask me to come in and do an assembly. And, you know, recently I was asked in Epping to speak to a primary school assembly. And I walked in with tiny little kids, you know, primary school kids. And sort of looking at them, and I said, well, and they were all English, you know, I couldn't see any Muslim faces. So I said, well, what do you think of when you hear the word Muslim? You know, just wanted to gauge how much knowledge they have. It's not a very multicultural community in Epping. And immediately a little girl who must have been about 5, 6 years old immediately piped up and said, Muslims are annoying. And I thought, oh Lord. And I thought that was sad because she has picked that up from somewhere. Yeah. She has immediately associated Muslim with annoying. That's worrying. So we need to be out there. And I think, you know, a lot of Muslims are doing that. They're doing school visits to show that, you know, we Muslims are not what you think we are. Yeah. We are something completely different.
So moving ahead, we need to stop being annoying.
I think that would help. That would really help.
Yeah, I'm just going back to your connection here to Epping. Do you mind me asking, where were you born, where were you brought up, and what brought you to Epping, and how long you've been here?
I think I have Bedouin blood. I have been all over the place. So I was born in Saudi Arabia, in Medina, in the holy city. I spent quite a few of my early years in Kenya, lived in Nairobi, went to school there, then came to London. My parents obviously are to blame, not myself. Grew up in North London, then got married, moved to Yorkshire. My husband loves Yorkshire. And as a fan of Charlotte Bronte and James Herriot, it was idyllic, it was lovely. And then we decided we wanted to come back to London, but my husband was tired of the big city. So we decided to move to a leafy suburb where we are very close to London, but can enjoy the tranquility as soon as we get home.
I mean, this is one thing, as I was coming here, you know, it's very, very peaceful, very, you know, rural.
It is. You know, for me, I talk a lot about this when I'm teaching, that the Quran talks constantly about God's signs, and he talks about nature. The Quran talks about nature constantly. Look at the mountains, look at the camels, look at the animals, you know, look at the ants, look at the spiders, look at the bees. Constant references to God's signs in nature. And I think that we need to, when we live in big cities where we are just stuck in concrete jungles, we need to come to God's real world and connect with nature. It's good for our children. Children are growing up in cities where they're stuck in computer games and just sitting indoors all day. I think that's very unhealthy. And it's really, really important that we take that time out to connect with God's real creation.
Is there any particular place or any part of Epping which you have a preference for, which you like more than others?
No, I love Epping, but there's Thaden Garnon Church is next door. That was the church for this monastery, and you know, it's been going for 400 or 500 years. It's beautiful. It's very peaceful. It is used as a ballot place as well. So when you vote, you have to go there to vote. But there's so much history. I mean, when you walk through the graves, and you see graves from 1400, 1500, and you just think about yourself, that we human beings are nothing compared to what has been around. I mean, there are trees there that are 400 years old. They have seen so much. And we come and we disappear. And you know, the Quran says that everything disappears except the face of God. And I think it's so important to put ourselves in the context of this world. But also just the beauty of a church, the stained glass windows. They have bell ringing practice every Wednesday evening, which is so lovely to hear. Then on Sunday morning that you hear the bells ringing for Sunday worship. And that is so nice. That sound of faith is lovely.
Ustadah Khola, a personal question now. In all of the different areas and fields of work you're involved in, what do you find are the biggest challenges?
I think for me personally, as a Muslim, I mean, there are so many challenges in society. Poverty, I think, is one of the biggest issues in society generally. And we don't seem to understand there's real poverty in Britain at the moment, real poverty that we need to be worrying about. But for me, as a Muslim woman, I think the biggest issue is probably that lack of respect that seems to be the undercurrent of Muslim thinking, that women are somehow second-class citizens, that their thoughts and their opinions are not as important as those of men, and that, you know, if a woman is struggling in a marriage, well, you can put up with it for God's sake. Whereas if a man is struggling in a marriage, oh, give her talaq and walk away, please, because you're important. And the fact that God created men and women as equals, and on the Day of Judgment we're going to stand as equals, and it's not our gender, but our character that is important, and we are not bringing up our children, I think, with that sense that we're still focused on gender. We're obsessed with gender and not on character. And for me, the character is what the Prophet ﷺ said, I came to perfect good character. We seem to have lost that, and I really worry about that.
So taking that forward then, understanding good character, having good manners, having good etiquettes, just being a nice person, Do you think that's the solution for many of the different problems which our Muslim communities face in this country? And if so, how would you encourage people to kind of embrace that vision?
Yeah. I think, we've become a community obsessed with greed, ostentation, celebrity worship. All communities are the same in Britain at the moment. And all that, the National Lottery is such an example of that. Everybody's just dreaming about winning millions and being happy. And what Islam and faith is teaching us is that it's not the wealth that makes you happy, it's the contentment that comes when you have a relationship with God. And the fact that you have a good character, that you're forgiving, that you're generous, that you don't compete, that you're not envious, that you don't misuse your tongue. These are the issues that we need to focus on when our kids are small. And we formulate those characters, but we're not doing that.
So speaking about children and how important their experience of Islam is, are you involved in any initiatives to make sure that they are welcomed and nurtured and brought up? I believe you wrote a book which was an introduction for Islam for newcomers to Islam.
Oh yes, I wrote a course book on Islam, which is sort of focused on young people who may be leaving home, going to university for the first time, as some sort of a book they can take with them as a reference point, something to read, and for converts as well, new people who come to Islam, just to get basics but with a bit of depth in them, not too basic, a bit of sort of study and discussion going on. But I mean, I've worked with various mosques through the years, encouraging women to participate in mosques, to use that as a central place. The Prophet ﷺ, we read the hadith that the women used to come for Jummah, and some of them, because they'd be travelling from far away, they haven't got cars, they're coming by camel or walking, they'd come early, and the women would be sitting there and they would be doing some knitting, or they'd be sitting early and be doing something with their clay pots or something to pass the time while they're waiting for Jummah. And that tells you that it was a happy place. And it was a meeting place, and where people were able to sleep, if they were travellers and nowhere to sleep, they could sleep in them. So it's not a closed building which opens 5 times a day and then locks doors again. It was a very central place. So I worked with a mosque for over 10 years in East London, where we had coffee mornings, where we had a children's play group, where we had study circles for teenagers, where we had a young men, there was a football and a kickboxing class. There was a lot going on, and then when I moved away I sort of stopped. But it's really important that the masjid is welcoming, and that young children are taught etiquettes of how to behave in a public setting. That because you're in a masjid, in a mosque, doesn't mean you can now run riot. You have to know the mannerisms of the place, but at the same time it's a welcoming place for everybody, regardless of gender and age. And to be a healthy focal point for the community, rather than something that's, shutters are closed and only open 5 times just for prayer.
On this same theme of reaching out to different members of the community, different elements of the community, I believe you're also present on social media, on Facebook, and how do you find that is important in the work, what you're doing now?
It can get very consuming, and when you are doing work within the community with real people, you have to be quite careful not to become absolutely, not to drown in social media. But I do have a Twitter presence, I do have a Facebook presence, and I will communicate with people, and I will try and send out messages. It's interesting that I get a lot of abuse back on Twitter, but never mind. At least people are communicating with me, and I might make them change their mind one day. But I think it's really important that, we are part of the world in which we live, and we can't sort of say, oh, I have to go back to pen and paper, and not communicate with the world in the way the world communicates. And then also to know the pitfalls, because I deal with women, for example, who've maybe got married and have been, it's called sexting, where they're sending indecent texts and photos to their husbands or would-be husbands, fiancés, and suddenly things go sour, and that's being used against them. And again, that comes from a lack of knowledge of the way social media can be exploited. So it's important that we know what it is and we use it well, and we teach our young people what the pitfalls are. If we don't know what they are, we won't be able to teach them.
Ustadah Khola Hasan, it's been an absolute honour to have your time and benefit from your wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Alaikum salam.
MashaAllah.